Good evening. This is Maestro Quatella with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Calderis Refinery. Our first player is Deltakyklos. I was never totally sure how to say that name, but he is playing as the Orc Warboss, a big tanky melee hero, wearing this backpack that I think looks like the back of a semi-truck. He can charge, knock things down, tie things up, disrupt. He can also buff with Use Your Choppas and Arid Boys. On the other side, we've got classy Brother Captain David playing as the Grey Knight Bro Captain. Another tanky melee hero, this one in Terminator armor, so he can not be knocked down or suppressed. Not very good at disrupting, but still just very tanky and good in that way. So then, before I start, I do want to say that I realized after the fact that the last match that I cast had actually already been cast by Indrid. And this was an accident. I apologize for it. Typically, I prefer not to cast games that have been cast by other casters, and I usually do try to check. I usually will scan both Rupee's channel and Indrid's to make sure that they haven't already cast a game that I have cast, but every once in a while, one slips through, and this has been true for myself, it's been true for Indrid, it's been true for Rupee. There was even one occasion a while ago when all three of us had actually cast the same match. All three of us just decided to jump on a match that we thought was particularly good, so we triple cast it. That only happened one time. And it doesn't actually seem like people mind that much, but I still don't think it's ideal, and I try not to do it. So I'm pretty sure that this match right here has not already been cast by Rupee or Indrid. And these players that we have are definitely do not represent the absolute top level of Dawn of War 2 play, but they are good players. They are good, solid players. They aren't Noisy or Toil Ali. They probably would lose to Noisy and Toil Ali and probably lose somewhat badly, but they are still definitely solid players. I'd say both are probably capable of beating me. Last time I played Classy Brother Captain David, I did actually have the edge over him, and I did beat him. But I'm a little rusty, and I imagine they're definitely on my level, if not better, to be honest, now that they actually play and I've been a little out of it. I've played with David quite a bit, in teams, in 1v1, a while back. I even tutored him a little bit when he was first starting to pick up the game, and now he's a pretty solid player. He's quite competent. Deltakyklos, I've definitely played him in teams. I don't recall if I've actually ever played him in 1v1, but I may have. And to be honest, I have a feeling that if we have ever played in 1v1, I would say he probably beat me. And this is a matchup that I'm not terribly familiar with. Never been much of an Orc player myself. I have dabbled a little bit in Grey Knights. Grey Knights have historically struggled a bit in 1v1, but they've changed a lot. These days, they're definitely in a better place than they have been in the past. They've progressively gotten more things to give them more options. One of the big assets of the Brother Captain is usually how incredibly tanky he is, especially with certain Tier 1 War Gear upgrades. The Blessed Aegis, as well as the Unending Purge, can make him super, super tanky. And that's usually just one of the biggest assets of Grey Knights in Tier 1. However, if there is a race that I think can deal with the tankiness of the Brother Captain as well as other tanky melee heroes just fine, Orcs is definitely one of them. Not the only one, but definitely one of them, since they usually start out with that double shooter build. The double shooter build is usually a high range DPS build. Usually. In this particular case, it's not so much, since Deltakyklos has chosen not to upgrade any of his shooter boys yet. So their damage right now is actually not terribly powerful. It's still decent because there are 2 shooter boy squads, and he also seems to be managing his engagements in a way that at the moment his shooters are not really drawing the damage, and that's kind of how you want to play it, particularly with the Warboss. The Warboss can afford to take damage because he's tanky, because he can not bleed at all as long as he doesn't get incapacitated. And that will distract the opposing units for the shooters to just open fire. However, the Warboss right here needs to be very, very careful. I think he was hoping to finish the decap on that Requisition, and he at some point realized that it wasn't worth decapping a Requisition if it meant losing his Warboss. So we do see a ranged heavy build from Delta, and I think that may be in part because of just feeling what he may need to do in order to deal with the Brother Captain. He's got a ranged heavy build. He's got the double shooter boys as well as a Luda squad. And a Luda squad, although it's not going to provide quite the same raw ranged DPS at long range as the shooter boys, the advantage of them is that they sort of limit the space that the Brother Captain can move around in, since the closer he gets, the more damage he will take from them. So he can't afford to get too close to the Ludas, at least not inside their firing arc, unless he can get around their firing arc. And I noticed what Delta did. He actually has prioritized upgrades, so that's the reason why he didn't get the upgrades on his shooters immediately. He got upgrades instead. He invested more in his Warboss and mostly just spent requisition on his squads. One of the things I also noticed about what Delta seems to be doing, right now he actually seems really conscious about preserving the models on his squads. He did a great job of preserving the models on his shooter boys. He's been using, I saw him use the Ard Boys buff as well as have the shooter boys behind this line of sight blocker so that they would not lose models and then keep them in the engagement. At this point, though, the Slugger Boys, rather, need to get out of here. They might even get wiped, so just as I say he was conscious of losing models, it looks like he's going to lose an entire squad, and he does. So, man, making me eat my words already, my words of praise as well. It's especially disappointing when someone makes me eat words of praise. Anyway, in this particular case, alright, Delta is now losing this engagement, I think, pretty handily. He does manage to get the Warboss. I thought the Warboss was out of this engagement, but he actually manages to charge and tie up the Purgation and force them off. So now it's just the Brother Captain and the Strike Squad. Now they actually seem to be doing pretty well. The Brother Captain still does not have any upgrades himself. And Delta, interestingly, choosing to replace the Slugger Boys, which, if anything, I'm slightly surprised. And the Warboss is going to go down. Overextension by the Warboss, so just as I start complimenting Delta's play, he falls apart a little bit in that engagement, and originally it looked like he was going to have the edge, or did it? I actually remember that his shooter boys as well as his Ludas were quite out of position. And I'm almost wondering why Delta wants to replace the Slugger Boys. He's replacing Slugger Boys that he had invested in. And I mean, eventually he probably will want Slugger Boys again if he ever decides to go for a vehicle. But I think he could afford to go to Tier 2 first, get a vehicle, and then get the Slugger Boys out. Or even just make sure he gets into Tier 2 first before replacing the Slugger Boys. I don't feel that he actually needed them that terribly much. I guess the big thing I would say in favor of the Slugger Boys is right now they are a capper. Since he definitely wants both of the Shooter Boy squads in combat, the Warboss in combat. Setup teams are very rarely ever desirable capping units, since they often, putting them in as a capping unit usually pretty much takes them out of combat if your opponent actually does press an engagement. And these Ludas actually not doing all that well because they're getting suppressed by the Purgation. Purgation themselves get suppressed, but I think the Ludas are in a bit of trouble and should probably just get out of there. They're losing quite a bit of their health. Slugger Boys as well. At this point, Delta not quite handling his squad preservation and engagements in well, and yeah, in this particular engagement, he was way out of position. I don't know what his shooters were doing. I think they were pretty much just trying to run away from the Brother Captain, but then they were charging into the Purgation and the Strike Squad, and I don't think either one of those is a winning engagement if either one of them decide to melee the Shooter Boys. I feel like Delta started off stronger earlier, but now he's definitely on the weak end of things. He's definitely going to suffer a Power Bash. The Purgation just need to start the Power Bash. And I see what he's doing. Rather than having all of his units, rather than David having all of his units focus on bashing power, he recognizes that he can have the Purgations bash by themselves. He's even using Attack Ground to bash multiple generators and nodes at once. Meanwhile, he's setting up the rest of his units in more of a defensive position. He even has not realized that the Purgation are done. So, smart by Delta. I like that he pretty much conceded the Power Bash, knew that he was going to lose the power, and instead he's moving out somewhere else and just drawing maybe he might go for a counter bash, but he does have some units tailing behind him. He's got the Terminator Librarian, the Strike Squad, and he's actually moving out rather under strength. And doing this, he's at risk at losing some of his squads. And I mean, to be honest, he probably will. This particular squad of sluggers, this second slugger squad, most likely going to go down. The loot is most likely going to go down, unless we have a call to boys, which is exactly what we saw. So Deltakyklos knew what he was doing. Used the call to boys global, move the Warboss into position, and that reinforces all of his squads that are out on the field. And he actually moves out now really at proper strength. And what this means is he should be able to entirely return the favor of the Generator Bash, as long as he has both the Sluggas and the Shooters destroying it right now. And I actually like what he's doing. Originally I was saying he should commit both Shooter Boys here to bashing, but instead I think he's going to have that Shooter Boy squad cap so that he can move the Ludas up, which are not a desirable bashing unit, but they will be able to slow the counterattack by Classy Brother Captain David. They will be able to suppress some of the, basically anything that approaches, well, not anything. They won't be able to suppress the Terminator Librarian or the Brother Captain. And this actually ends up being a relatively even trade. And I think that's actually... Delta was doing poorly for a little bit, and now I think he's actually stepped up again, and now he's doing well. He had a really good answer for a Generator Bash. Pretty much ignored the force that burned down his generators, moved out under strength, used a game-changing global called the boys. He's got to watch out here, though, for this Sanctuary put down by the Terminator Librarian. Does put down this energy shield, or not really an energy shield, but it's a field, like it's a bubble, and anything that goes inside it will get knocked back. So Delta now looking... He actually really managed to turn around a disadvantageous situation. Might even take out the Brother Captain for his troubles. Now it will be a major asset. Decides to pull back with the Slugger Boys. Now he activates Swamp 'em, which I feel like he should have done that earlier. But, well, he didn't. And now Delta is actually at the advantage. Relatively speaking, one of the things David has going for him is that right now he does have the larger army. But even with that, Delta has been winning the engagements. Delta now looking incredibly strong, about to take most of the map, about to bash down Classy Brother Captain David's last power node. David is now moving out, switches to side cannons on the Purgation Squad. I don't feel that that was a great choice at the moment. That actually gives him less control, a bit more damage, but less control. More damage against the Warboss, at least. I'm not actually sure that it would give him more damage against things like the Slugger Boys and the Shooter Boys. So I don't feel that the side cannon investment was the greatest investment at this point. I feel like he would be better off with some kind of other upgrade or an entirely new squad. We now have a fully upgraded Brother Captain, though, and I think that might be one thing that maybe Classy Brother Captain David was having a little bit of trouble with. He had an under-equipped Brother Captain. Had no weapon upgrade. He's pretty much gone all in on weapon upgrades or war gear upgrades now. Nemesis Force Halberd, usually one of the more desired weapons for the Brother Captain. Generally considered the best overall for, well, actually hitting things, whereas the other weapons for the Brother Captain are more about their abilities or effects. Alright, failed to tie up the Ludo with the Brother Captain, took too much damage with the Brother Captain, so he just followed up with the Terminator Librarian. And I guess it's actually a pretty nice deal right now having... Oh, no, he needs to ignore the Ludas, go for the Shooter Boys. Oh, he's going with the Shooter Boys with the Purgation. I was saying he needs to go for it with the Librarian. But he knew what he was doing there. Actually managed to finish off one of Delta's Shooter Boy squads. Very, very nice use of Sanctuary right there. And it's actually great that the Terminator Librarian can use that ability even while being disrupted himself and get all those melee units off of him. That being said, he's still going off the field, liking the plays that we've seen so far. I think it's really been only early on when Delta had a few fumbles, but otherwise so far it's been a pretty well-played game, I think, on both sides. Liking what I'm seeing. Classy Brother Captain David showing off a little bit about what he knows about the Grey Knights. And the Terminator Librarian, I feel, is actually a great unit for the Grey Knights at the moment. You get another tanky single entity, which can be very, very powerful, particularly in some matchups. The Sanctuary, I feel, is also a big game changer for the Grey Knights. One of their biggest issues when Grey Knights were originally being implemented was dealing with melee, and they really lacked a lot of disruption. So the Sanctuary ability for the Terminator Librarian is one of the new things that acts as a melee disruption. Just creates this bubble, and anything that walks into it will get disrupted. So it's like a barrier as well as disruption. Very, very nice. Delta, meanwhile, now in Tier 3. I wonder if we'll eventually see the knobs. And I didn't comment more about the upgrades that the Warboss had. But he invested in the cyborg implants, so that actually gives him something to help deal with both of those tanky single entities from Class C Brother Captain David, since he can stun with the big stomp, and he can stun both the Terminator Librarian as well as the Brother Captain. And these are normally as units that are unsuppressible as well as unshakable, and unshakable is, I believe, the actual term for units that cannot be knocked down. There are just fewer forms of disruption that actually work against these units. Wow, Brother Captain walks right into the Ludas. He might go down in retreat. It's a close call. He doesn't, though. He was too far away from the Shooter Boys. Again, close call because he was charging right into the Luda Boy squad. And the Brother Captain is actually so tanky that in some cases he actually can charge directly into a suppression team and actually tie it up successfully. Usually he will still take a lot of damage on approach, though, so he usually will not have much health left by the time he does tie it up. And the angry bits right here are usually a pretty popular choice for the Warboss. Gives him a charge, and I think that actually will disrupt both the Terminator Librarian and the Brother Captain. I would need to see it again to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that they can, or that he can disrupt them. Use your choppers right now on the Slugger Boys. Actually ends up being a good choice. Oh my god, and the Strike Squad end up fumbling a little bit in retreat after losing a model, and that does sometimes happen. However, I think now the Slugger Boys run. Wow, that was beautiful! What a play by Brother Captain David right there. So I didn't point out before that David has invested in the Psychic Lash ability and War Gear for the Brother Captain. And that will basically works like a flesh hook for the way it does for the Lictor Alpha. And there we go. Angry Bits, or the Now I'm Angry charge, does in fact disrupt units like the Brother Captain. But that Psychic Lash right there, it is like a flesh hook for the Brother Captain, very similar to the Lictor Alpha's flesh hook, except it's called Psychic Lash. It has no visual effect because it's psychic. And he basically just pulls a unit toward him. There, he actually pulled the Knob model. And that was off, yes, that was off the Slugger Squad. So they actually have lost their Knob. And I actually feel like the Sluggers, they actually seem to very rarely lose their Knob. Usually, I think it's mainly just because the Knob model is so much tougher than the regular Slugger models, that I was actually often under the impression that the Slugger Knob was just a die last model. Like the regular Slugger models had to die before the Knob would die. But in that case, we saw otherwise. Oh, looted tank! Didn't even realize. So Delta has not opted for the knobs. He's got the Flash Gets out on the field, and he's got the looted tank. Looted tank, I actually think, a pretty nice choice. I'm a big fan of tanks, period. I think they're just a great unit. Very, very flexible and all-around good. Not necessarily always the best choice, but I actually believe that they are more versatile and less easily countered than something like knobs. That's my opinion. Certainly can feel free to disagree with that. But I mean, I think it helps that you can keep something. Not only can you keep something like a looted tank at a distance, but you are really meant to keep it at it. Wow, that was terrible though. So somehow something messed up with that looted tank shot. I saw the target marker, and he targeted the strike squad, but I think maybe because of some slight difference in elevation right here with this, I don't know, pad that's right by the VP, the looted tank shot short and actually disrupted his own flash hits while doing nothing to the strike squad. So that ended up being a rather unfortunate engagement for Delta. He has lost his Warboss, lost his flash gets. This is a very interesting global. A Hellfury strike on nothing. And why did he do that? Pretty much to just buy himself some time. And I don't know like how worth it that was, whether that was really the best idea, but either way, it bought himself some time. It bought some time when the VP counter is going to continue to tick down in favor of David, and it was time when Delta was not going to put his shooter boys on the point. I think a big effect of that is, wow, and he's again using that Psychic Lash to pull that shooter boy model. Or in this case, the shooter knob. That Psychic Lash proving to be pretty effective and a great choice. And I actually think, yeah, the Hellfury strike was actually working out well, because it pretty much prevented a cap on the VP by Delta. And this Sanctuary as well also proving to be quite a, well, I was about to use a word that was not appropriate, but quite a deterrent, that's what we'll say. Looks like ultimately the VP will go back in favor of David, but, I mean in favor of Delta, but all of what David did there did manage to stall out Delta from getting the VP back and just give him a little more time to stay in the game, keep more time on his clock, and I often view the VP counters as clocks for each player, and when the clock runs out for you, your time is up. And of course you want to make the clock run out for your opponent. Alright, Delta now looking in a very strong position. We're going to see, we're going to see very, very nice. This is beautiful right now because this is a potential, okay. It's just a retreat, and to be honest, if it wasn't a retreat, it was a potential incapacitate on the Warboss. So we're seeing that Psychic Lash being put to great use, and I was actually really surprised with how much he was using it on the Slugger knobs as well as the shooter knob. Originally, I thought like, oh, he's using that on the Warboss, and I mean, it's very clearly a great tool against the Warboss. And he's actually using it in many other ways, that ability proving to be more versatile than I originally thought it would be. Alright then. So David now moving out. He is actually doing a great job of keeping the VPs. He's really playing the VP war very well. Using his stalling tactics before, he managed to get a decap on Delta's natural at a time when it looked like Delta was going to threaten a triple cap. And, I mean, the consequence of the way he's playing the VP war is that even though he ended the last engagement at a disadvantage, he's not that far behind in VPs. He's doing very well in VPs, actually. Considering it almost looked like Delta was going to threaten a triple cap. I also like the play right there. We had some infiltrated paladins, courtesy of the shrouding ability from the Terminator Librarian. So part of what I really like about what we're seeing from David is he's really showing off his knowledge of the Grey Knights. Like, for example, if it was me playing the Grey Knights, you wouldn't see me using all these abilities because I don't have enough familiarity actually using all of those abilities. I know about them and I know what they do. But using them in-game is an entirely different story. Anyway, this engagement actually looking to favor David, and Delta loses an entire knob squad in that engagement. Beautiful. David now looking really, really strong, and it's only the looted tank right here that's still out on the field for Delta. He's actually lost most of his units. I'm actually wondering if this is going to be a GG for Delta in favor of David. And Delta not happy about the Grey Knights. Yeah, I don't see Delta really coming back from that. Looks like Classy Brother Captain David actually did lose. Wow, he lost his Terminator Librarian, of all things, sometime in that engagement, which is kind of sad. He was doing great with that Librarian. It's a unit that's just... And I think it was actually a key unit in David's victory here, if he does win, which it looks like he is. So it's sad to see that he lost it, but I think it's still going to win the game for him at this point. Yeah, this is definitely the game in favor of David. Actually, very, very impressed with David's Grey Knight play right here. Really showing off his knowledge of all their different abilities. I feel like we didn't actually see that much of the Canticle of Absolution from the Mantle of Terra. So I don't know that this warrior actually was put to use. I don't recall it being put to use. But he definitely made great use of the Psychic Lash as well as the Librarian's abilities. Alright, so game goes in favor of classy Brother Captain David. Proud to see it. As I said, kind of tutored this guy. In part made him the player that he is today. Well, wouldn't be surprised if he's better than me now. Alright, hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.